All right, so new day. Finally had some time to get some stuff done. Here's obviously your setup. I haven't tightened. Let me point to it. These bolts here. All right, those are very important when you're tightening them to make sure that your alignment tool is holding the clutch up some and centered. I say that because if you don't, you are going to play hell trying to get that torque tube back in there. This input shaft here will not line up properly, and it would go through the clutch in the rear, the clutch disc in the rear, but it will not go through the one in the front. So as you're bolting this down and tightening it, you need to do it in a sequence. I believe the paperwork, it says like 1, 7, 3, 5, 11 for the torque sequence. Basically like a star pattern, typical in the automotive industry for balancing stuff when you're bolting stuff down. But make sure as you do that, that this alignment tool stays centered and your clutch disc stays centered, because if not, you will never get that input shaft back in there. And if you do and it's not lined up properly, you could just eat the end of your input shaft up. This torque tube and input shaft should go in like butter. My last car, I fought the hell out of it. It took forever to get it in. And then I finally just said the hell with it, loosened up these nuts again. Once I loosened up all them nuts, it slid right in. So if you have to fight to get your torque tube back in there, something's not lined up properly. Loosen it all back up on your pressure plate, center your alignment tool and your clutch, and go ahead and torque it back down. Just to be clear, the instructions, as you see it there, 1739.511 is what the torque sequence is. And that's what we'll be doing. So make sure you get it lined up properly. I'm telling you, you will fight it like crazy later. All right, so it's another day. I'm actually measuring my shim for my throwout bearing. The reason you want to do this is that when you're using an aftermarket throwout bearing, slave cylinder, and clutch, pressure plate, and flywheel, you may be changing the distance that this can actually travel to press in your pressure plate fingers to release the clutch. If that doesn't have the proper shim, or you don't have the proper travel, what will happen is you'll get premature clutch failure, and also basically you might not be able to go in gear sometimes. Because the throwout bearing is not able to push the pressure plate enough, or you'll end up grinding. So it's important that you shim it. So basically what you do is you lay your ruler here flat, and then you're gonna measure the distance between where my pinky finger is on the bottom of that ruler to the surface of this. And basically I got like 2.3, it was 2.3125. That seemed to be the average answer. Now, you do this without the spring and the slave cylinder. And you have these shims here. They have like a small, medium, and a larger one. I bought them from Tick Performance. The one I used in the last car was the medium one, I want to say, or maybe it was the thicker one. But I definitely ended up needing it. I will post the actual measurements that you are going to want to look for, the range that you want to be in. But the next measurement you take is actually that tip of that bell housing to the tip of the pressure plate fingers itself at the very highest point. Once you take that measurement, then you basically you would just subtract your ruler from that, because you're going to get the thickness of the ruler in that measurement, and you don't want that. And then when you subtract that, you should have two numbers, and those two numbers should equal within a certain measurement. I don't have the instructions with me. I haven't pulled all that stuff out yet. Once I get all this crap out of the garage, because it is raining again, it seems like that is my luck every time I come out here. Once I get everything out of the garage, I'll bust out those instructions. I'll probably just post a picture of them to make it easy for everybody, so that way if anybody's watching the video, you know the measurement you need to be within. So I'll get my stuff out of the garage, and then I'll do that other measurement. All right, so I took this measurement, and from two separate sets of measurement done two very different ways, it's showing I don't need a shim. surprisingly enough. Everything's aftermarket. Flywheel, pressure plate, clutch, throw-out bearing, slave cylinder, it's all aftermarket. So I kind of thought I was gonna need a shim, but if you don't need one, you don't need one. So on this, I took the ruler and I just laid it on there flat like this. And what you do is, and it's hard for me to hold the camera and do this, but you take your tip of your, sorry, let me get this right, jumping a little bit further. All right, so you take this, let me set something down, because this is up. So basically you're going to take the tip, place it right onto your pressure plate finger, the highest point. And then you're gonna let the bottom of this, right here, go down onto the ruler. Now, if you stand your ruler up like this, you need to take that out measurement of the width of it. If you lay it flat, you need to take the measurement out of the width of it this way. So I did it both ways. I did this with it flat on the bell housing, running my micrometer down to the tip of the pressure plate finger and the ruler. And I also did it this way standing up. And both ways, including redoing it this way, I ended up not needing a shim. So pretty happy about it, I guess, but I really thought I was gonna need one. Had I not went and bought another shim to replace the one I used, I would have probably needed it. So Murphy's Law, I guess, but naturally I don't need one this go around. So next is basically, I'm gonna try and see if I can't put the torque tube in there, only to make sure that it will sit flush against the bell housing. If you have your clutches lined up properly, it should go in like butter. I've had it in wrong and it's been a bitch, and I've had it in correct and it slide right in. So make sure you have your clutches lined up properly and you'll be all right. So now I need to get this off. There's a little pin that's pressed in there. Pretty easy to get out if you got the right tool. And then I need to go ahead and get the differential off. And I'm gonna go ahead and bolt those to the new transmission. Then I'm gonna take a look and see if any of the sensors on there need to be swapped over. And that's about it. Once I get that on there, I'll put that on, the differential on, and I think we're about ready to go ahead and start putting everything back together. I am not gonna put it back together with the cradle looking like this. It's not something you can see from underneath the car, from when it's underneath the car and you're on the outside of it, you can't see it, but at the same time, it needs to be cleaned up. I'm probably gonna replace this axle too, because I noticed it was slinging a bunch of grease and shit. But it's very easy to do, especially since it's out. So I'll probably replace that, pressure wash the cradle, and start putting everything back together. So. Another thing I wanted to make a quick video about, this pin that holds on your, basically like your shifter rod here, if you have the right punch, it's pretty easy. If you have the wrong punch, like I had a couple different ones, you will fight the shit out of it. Let me see if I can get what size this is. This punch is pretty old, but just gives you an idea. This knocked it out like 2 hits. So anyway, make sure you got the right punch when you try to get it out, or otherwise you're just gonna fight it the whole way. All right, so I spent a little time doing more this evening than what I thought I was gonna be doing. I went ahead, here's the old trans. That's an old setup I had out of another car, but here's the old trans. One thing, if you're ever looking for a Z06 trans, they typically say DXB on them. This was out of a Z51. It says DXC. So basically I just popped the differential off of this one. Went ahead and took my shifter rod and what else? that mount that goes back here. I think it's just like a stabilizer to pick up vibration. When you go to do this, if you're not doing it on a bench, like I still have fluid in it, as you can see. I didn't drain it. I didn't drain my last one. I will drain it when I get it all back in the car. It's not that big of a pain in the ass to me for me to put, you know, this stuff down. So you got 2 bolts here. Those go through. Those are easy. These here are basically held on by a nut. And this, as you can see, has a screw here. Sorry, has a bolt here, a bolt here, a bolt here, and those are held on and you put a nut on. This one's kind of like the hard one to find because typically it's covered in crap. It has grease and all this like icky stuff. I had a leak, like I said, so I won't be having a leak anymore, but that's why this is dark. I am gonna go ahead and reinstall this onto the new trans, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pressure wash everything, clean it up. I'm gonna try and figure out a way to brighten up this aluminum from the stain, if there's something I can use to do it, so that way I don't have to reinstall a dingy looking differential back in. But I kind of checked out the teeth, everything looked good, still 342 from the factory. I didn't figure I'd be lucky enough because I don't think this drivetrain's ever been out of the car, so I thought maybe I'd get lucky and there's somebody that swapped differentials, but I guess not. But anyway, the way the Z06 trans is geared, you really don't need an aftermarket rear gear, or you know, aftermarket rear gear ratio, I should say. The way the gears are, the way the trans is geared as it is good enough. But I ran some better gears on my Z51 car and I liked it, so I wouldn't mind having 373s. I wouldn't go 410, it'd be too much because the first gear ratio on this is different. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and install that differential back on there, get it bolted up, and then I'm gonna start cleaning everything up, and I might call it a night because I don't really feel like digging my pressure washer out and getting all my other stuff to clean that up. And I'm gonna start digging into ways to do the aluminum brightener on this stuff, see what I can come up with. So, I'm not gonna lie to anybody on this channel. I have literally played hell for the last few days. So I can't really give you a video under the car right this second. Just got too much going on under there, but my clutch was aligned enough for the pressure, for the alignment tool to slide right in and out, like no problem at all. I told a friend of mine that if I had tilted the motor, I felt like the alignment tool would just flip right out. That's how well aligned I felt it was. However, when I went to go install the torque tube, I could not get it in. And the last thing you want to do is force it by using bolts to draw it in, so you could damage the pilot or things like that. So I ended up taking the torque tube back out of the tunnel and realigning the clutches. I did it 3 friggin' times. Finally, on the last attempt, I'm like, you know what, there must be something I'm missing. So I jacked up, I actually stuck a piece of wood underneath the engine oil pan and just lightly lifted it a hair. And no sooner did I do that, did everything slide right in. So torque tube was in. Yesterday I came out here and tried to get the trans and differential in. That put up a hell of a fight for me as well. Sometimes it just goes that way. I will say I had less struggles doing this job on the ground than I have using a lift this go around. But there it is, trans, diff, torque tubes in front of that. I have that holding it up way up in the front. I'm fixing to put the cradle back in. One thing I thought was neat, I got this new CV axle, put it in. Notice that this collar here is actually like a metal material instead of that other one over there, which is just a rubber boot. So it was 90 bucks, AutoZone lifetime warranty. I'm gonna go ahead and replace that one because this looks way better than that. And it's obviously gonna be stronger having, I'm assuming that's made of, I don't know. I'm assuming steel, and it definitely feels quality. So it's a lot better than one of these rubber boots. So I am gonna replace it. I went ahead and threw the exhaust over the cradle first. I'm gonna hook them into the exhaust mounts right there. That's what this is. That is where this slides into. It just is easier to do that when you have the cradle out of the car than fighting it later. One thing I wanna also point out to people, when you do your shifter linkage on these cars, you're gonna notice that there is this Allen head, star head with the linkage running through it, and then there's your shifter rod that I had in a previous video. There is a flat spot in that area where you have to line up that bolt when you put it back through. There's a U-bolt like this, and that bolt, I'm sorry, like a U-clamp, and that bolt runs right through it, right where my middle finger is pointing there. And it has a groove inside of that linkage that it needs to slide down into in order for your shifter linkage to stay put. It's really not bad. I did it from inside the car. I did not line it up from the bottom of the car. So if it's something you end up doing later, make sure you line up that linkage. But yeah, I kind of skipped a lot of the realigning of the clutch, and I skipped fighting the trans. I learned some new cuss words, made some of my own on that job yesterday. I noticed when things don't go well for me, it's best for me to just throw in the towel and come at it the next day, and that's what I did. So I went in the house, gave up on it, came out today, and I've made more progress in the last hour than I did yesterday in 2 hours. So, and made more progress in the last hour than I did Sunday last week, believe it or not. So the whole damn day. Some days it just flows, everything's just thrown together and smooth, and other days it's a fight. So, I have forgotten to take videos while I'm making progress. I just keep plugging along, getting stuff done, and I have forgot to stop and make videos of some of the stuff I've done. Reassembly is obviously no different than disassembly, it's just backwards. Went ahead and threw the brakes and the calipers back on. Went ahead and hooked up my emergency brake again. Tighten these bolts down, that one, and then obviously the one, if you can see it, right here. So I've gotten those tightened back down, and this side, same thing, new CV axle. That actually fought me going in. I had a friend that came over, and me and him kind of took turns at it because it just did not want to go in, and finally we got it seated, and that was it. Driver's side went in flawlessly. I did make a mess, not a mess, I messed up. This brake line here should run in front of this part of the cradle, and instead I just ran it back around. I wasn't going to drop the cradle, redo that, and I wasn't going to disconnect the brake line right there and reroute it. It's not that big of a deal to begin with. I am going to support those brake lines up a little bit higher just so I can prevent them from touching that diff, but you have wiggle room back there to move this stuff, so it works out nice. As of right now, I'm going to put the pan back in. I'm going to go ahead and put the exhaust back on. I forgot about my shocks. I'm going to throw those in. What I'm going to do is collapse the shock, probably keep it held closed with some zip ties, and then run this bolt in and then bolt it back up there. Once I put the exhaust, valley pan, and shocks back in, I just gotta bleed it, put this cover back on the bottom here, and that's pretty much it. We'll be ready to do a test drive and see what's going on and see if everything's working. And I'm gonna run Royal Purple 75W90 without the additive and the diff. If I decide I have some chattering later on, then I'll go ahead and add the additive. But apparently with Royal Purple 7590, you don't need to do that. And then Royal Purple for the trans too, which I have to go get that stuff. So reassembly's coming along. The exhausts back in. I actually throw these over the cradle while I lift up the cradle into the bottom of the car. So that way I don't have to fight. This side, you don't have to fight at all. You can get those in and out all day. This side, on the other hand, you do have to fight a little bit here and there. So to make my life easy, I just threw them above the cradle before I even up the cradle in there. And it really does not get in your way. So that's it. I'm gonna finish buttoning some of this stuff up and let's go for a test drive. So I got most of the car back together. At this point, I was pretty much just ready to go ahead and put fluid in the differential and fluid in the trans. Originally, when I put everything together, I thought to myself, you know what? I'll probably test the slave cylinder to make sure it doesn't leak. And I just kept making progress. I never really did test the thing to see. I never pumped the clutch after I hooked the lines up just to see before I started reassembling all this stuff. And there it is. My slave cylinder is leaking. So obviously I didn't find out on camera because you would have heard a lot of cuss words. I'm pretty pissed. I have to remove everything again that I've already done. I gotta get the torque tube out, which I had hell with. I gotta get the trans differential and rear cradle. Gotta take the brakes back apart. I gotta unhook a bunch of stuff. Pretty pissed off. The company that made the clutch, or the slave cylinder, is Clutch Pro, or Clutch Max Pro. I'll find the name of it. I think it was Clutch Max Pro. It was like 60 bucks. I remember thinking to myself when I was buying it, I never buy cheap stuff. It looks like a really quality part, and I thought maybe it's just somebody making it for, you know, a quality product that isn't necessarily expensive. It's a slave cylinder. I didn't really think it'd be that big of a deal to buy one that was cheap, but I was wrong. I ordered a new one from TIC, 140 bucks. I contacted the company that makes this, it's Clutch Pro, or Clutch Max Pro. I told them, like, you now cost me hours because you guys put a seal in a slave cylinder that's no good, and it just pumps fluid out when you pump the clutch. They pretty much told me to prove it, so I'm gonna send them some pictures when I get it back apart, and obviously I'll never use them again, and I will go a different route. But that's the update. Pretty much everything's gotta come back out. Exciting, yes. I'm actually, because of this, going to do a part 2 end right now. So I'm back to disassembly. I'm gonna make this my part 2 and go on to a part 3 once I get everything back in the friggin' car and back to being hooked up. Thanks, Clutch Max Pro, you fucking assholes. This is going to cost me a lot of time. I could have been driving the car right now. Sorry for the language. It is what it is. I'm pretty mad about it, but I'm gonna jump off of here, got work to do, and check out part 3 once I get it done. All right, I actually decided to add to this a little bit. I got everything back apart. A-arms are unhooked. The emergency brakes back unhooked on both sides. Wiring harness is undone from the trans. Wiring harness is unplugged from the speed sensors, ABS sensors, whichever those are. And I got all this apart. And if you look up in here, if it'll show any kind of light, and it won't. Let me see if I can figure out a way to turn the flash on here. So because I'm recording, it won't let me turn on the flash. But I will take a picture of it. But basically, this line here is spewing out fluid, and the back of the actual slave cylinder itself. So it's leaking from 2 different spots. Really just kind of irritates me because, like I said, it's a lot of work. The funny part is I say that, but it only took me an hour to get everything ready to drop again. The only thing I didn't do is the cradle bolts. That's because this weekend, I have a friend of mine coming over. We're gonna put a table right here with wheels. We're gonna lower the cradle, trans, diff, everything as one assembly, including the torque tube. And we're gonna just pull it right out. I'm gonna slap the new slave cylinder in and throw out bearing, and we're gonna measure to make sure I don't need a shim like we talked about before. I'm not gonna take the measurements from the pressure plate fingers to the bell housing, but I am gonna take the measurements for the throw out bearing seated all the way to the face of the bell, I guess. Once I do those measurements, we're gonna go ahead and figure out if I need the shim, and then we're gonna just go ahead and reinstall it. I'm gonna go ahead and button everything back up. So I'm glad I got a friend coming to help me this weekend. But it took an hour to get everything back apart, including the line. The line wasn't that bad, actually. The line came right apart, so I was pretty happy about that. But, yep, all right, so this is the end of part 2. I know I said that last video was, but I kind of wanted to go through some of this stuff. I, like an idiot, undid the exhaust without undoing the O2 sensors. Rookie mistake. I got everything unhooked, and I was like, why is this thing not wanting to release from the car? And sure enough, I forgot to do my O2 sensor. So I had to sit there and straddle the O2 sensors on my shoulder, or I'm sorry, the exhaust on my shoulder while I undid the O2 sensors. But other than that, everything went smooth. And that was my own stupidity there. So hang in there for part 3. Part 3 won't be too far behind because I'm gonna stay focused and getting crunched down and getting this thing done. See ya.